All right, hey, welcome back, guys. Haven't uploaded in a little bit. Wanted to do a movie review to get back into things. Just saw Godzilla -1 a few days ago. Wanted to review it. I am a huge Godzilla fan. Always excited for a new Godzilla movie, even if, sometimes they're not expected to be great, as has been the case with the last couple of Godzilla films. I can tell you that looking at other people's thumbnails, I have not seen a single other Godzilla review for this movie. I always like to make my review first before seeing other people's reviews. But based on the thumbnails, the titles of other Godzilla -1 review videos, I can assume that my review is probably going to be a little different than the others. And you'll see why by the end of this. Just a quick note, spoilers. There are going to be a lot of spoilers in this video. I am not going to try to keep anything hidden. If you haven't seen the movie, go see the movie. It's a good movie. And then come back here. If you don't care about spoilers and you can go into a movie watching it, knowing what happens and still enjoy it, then of course, stick around and hear my thoughts on the film. So the plot is purely simple. It's almost entirely the original Godzilla story. Godzilla just tearing apart Japan after evolving thanks to one of the nuclear bombs that the US had used against Japan. So he was already a large creature on an island that was killing people as he did in the opening scene, and then the bomb just made him bigger. The story follows a kamikaze pilot, a failed kamikaze pilot, obviously, or we wouldn't have him around for the story. From the beginning of the movie, we find that he has an early encounter with Godzilla, killing a lot of men in front of him. He believes it to be his fault for their deaths. He finds himself to be a failure, first for not being a good kamikaze pilot, suicide bomber. He is basically looked down upon by a couple characters early on in the film for not accomplishing that goal, and then he has an opportunity to shoot Godzilla in the face with a very large gun, but he doesn't do so out of fear and a panic attack, and so he feels like the men who died in the beginning of the movie to Godzilla are his own fault. The movie then continues to take us a couple years into the future. He's acquired a female roommate and a small child who he's taken under his wing to take care of, to live with him, kind of a small family of strangers. And throughout this time, he's just basically tormented with nightmares and thoughts about that day on the island in the beginning of the movie where Godzilla killed some people and he feels responsible. He is on the verge of seems like insanity. He doesn't know if he's real or not. He's struggling with his own reality. He thinks he's dreaming. He thinks he might have died on the island, and he thinks that maybe he's just having illusions of a life with this girl and this child before he dies. Obviously not true, but again, he's just suffering through a lot of mental issues from that day, struggling with depression and pain, and filled with a lot of good characters around him. The job he has now acquired, looking for mines in the ocean from the war to basically detonate them, to get rid of them. He's got coworkers in that area in the film that are trying to basically help him get back on his feet. So is the girl in his life. They're basically a bunch of supporting characters that are trying to help him deal with this anxiety, this depression, these attacks. They're very supporting characters. I actually really like that part of the film. Godzilla does show up much larger because of the nuclear attack, and I'm assuming he gained the atomic breath as a result of that. Godzilla lays waste to the city, attacking a train where the main character's girlfriend, quote-unquote girlfriend. That's actually one part of the plot, is that he's kind of pushing off a relationship with her as he's not really sure again if it's reality, and he's also struggling with his own nightmares, and he doesn't feel it'd be right for him to be in a relationship, so he keeps pushing that off. But he does care for her a lot, and he does think about being with her from time to time. Godzilla's first encounter with the Japanese people, as he is now much larger, leads to her death in the film, which then brings him to anger and grief and actually gives him a kick that he needs to kind of be more stable. He kind of focuses more. He kind of has a goal in mind of killing Godzilla. He gets less anxiety when it comes to using equipment to fight and to be prepared, to train, to make a plan to take down Godzilla. And I actually really like that. It took losing someone very close to the main character to get him to focus, to get him to really have a drive to accomplish what needs to get done. And I really like that part of the film. Godzilla stomps on a few buildings. He uses his atomic breath, which basically produces a smallish atomic bomb, almost like explosion, and then Godzilla basically just leaves, and then the Japanese make a plan, not exactly the Japanese government, but a small amount of soldiers and former, I believe, generals. They form a small group with a plan to kill Godzilla, basically tying around these containers around his waist that once they're activated, they will basically sink Godzilla down to the bottom of the sea very, very quickly. So quickly that the pressure will kill him, and if that doesn't work, they'll automatically from that depth expand flotation devices, giant flotation devices, which will make Godzilla rise very rapidly, freezing him in the process very quickly, and they're hoping that will kill him. And it works a little bit, but it doesn't completely kill him. And something that was very obvious from the very beginning of the film happened. I'm not saying it was a bad thing though. I was expecting it, but as soon as I found out the main character was a kamikaze pilot, more so a failed kamikaze pilot, it kind of already telegraphed to me he's going to do something suicide bombish at the end of the movie to Godzilla, but this time he's going to succeed. Which was the case. He ended up flying a plane into Godzilla's mouth with a bomb in it. And for anyone thinking that, you know, it's just, kind of cringy, there's just a pro-suicide bomber message in the movie. No, not really. The movie did go to lengths to speak against suicide bombing. It did actually take a jab at Japan's old methods in the film. There is a moment in the movie where one of the main characters, a scientist, or I believe he was a weapons engineer, or the smart one in the group, he spoke against Japan's method. He says in one part of the movie, this country has taken lives too lightly, or it's used them too cheaply. It's my favorite scene in the movie. He lists different ways that Japan has just wasted their lives and put their lives in areas that were not worth it. And the last thing he mentions is kamikaze pilots, suicide bombing, while the main character is standing in the room hearing that. So the movie in no way praises such a thing. At the end of the movie, it was the main character's own choice. He was not forced by Japan's government, but he wanted to do it to save everyone around him. I really like that the movie did that. Yes, it was kind of obvious it was going to end that way based on who the main character was, but at the same time, didn't at all push some kind of pro-suicide message, but rather it did the very opposite. If anything, even more so, because the main character does live. One other character basically put an ejection seat into the plane and told him about it. It was one of those movie moments where two characters are having a conversation, but the audio is cut off. Again, it was quite obvious what they were talking about. It was pretty obvious that he was showing him a switch for the ejection seat. So you knew he was going to live. Still, I loved it. It was great. I love that message of you need to live. You shouldn't die. There was a character at the beginning of the movie that scolded him. It was his neighbor who scolded him for not being a successful kamikaze pilot and was angry at him. And then at the end of the movie, when she sees that he's alive, even after trying to kill himself to kill Godzilla, he lives, and she's happy to see him live. The plane exploding does kill Godzilla as he was on his way to wreck the city again, and Godzilla's head is blown off. The movie does establish Godzilla has healing powers, but it doesn't heal him quickly enough, I guess, and his body just crumbles and starts to sink under the sea. Everyone's happy, everyone's celebrating. The main character gets news that the girl he's been living with is actually okay. She's in a hospital, she didn't die, and there's a beautiful moment at the end of the movie where him and the young girl that they both basically adopted see her in the hospital bed and just cry and embrace each other and realize that they can be a family now. That's the basic plot in general. As for the human element of the film, which I want to talk about first, and I want to talk about just the practical filmmaking elements that go into it, and then after that I want to talk about Godzilla directly. The human element of this film was the best part of this movie for me. the characters, their acting, it was very emotional, it was very dramatic, it was very, very good. Not overly so in any shape or form. I absolutely loved it. Made me very emotional. It was very good. I will tell you that my favorite Godzilla movie, and I should have prefaced the start of this video because there would be a lot of references to this I'm going to make, which is Godzilla 2014 by Legendary Pictures. That is my favorite Godzilla movie. Even after seeing this one, it is still my favorite Godzilla movie to date. And I would say that I like the human elements in this movie more than that one, I think. It's very close. It's very, very close. This one just seemed to make me more emotionally involved with these characters than I did with Godzilla 2014. I really enjoyed following this character through his initial encounter with Godzilla, and then the anxiety, panic attacks, the nightmares that followed, just being traumatized by that, and just the couple characters that were angry at him for not killing himself in the war and scolding him for that, basically just beating him down even more than he already was beaten down after seeing a bunch of men get stomped on and eaten by Godzilla early on in the film. But then seeing a flurry of characters just try to encourage him, tell him to move on with his life, tell him to be happy, tell him to embrace the reconstruction of the city, to join the rest of them in rebuilding their lives, and to just move on with his life. Although Godzilla's origins were set more in anti-nuclear war, and it was a message directly related to the US bombing of Japan after they attacked us. It doesn't really push any strong political message, which I do appreciate. It didn't really say anything in the movie like, oh, the US this or the US that. You know, it doesn't do anything like that. It doesn't mention Pearl Harbor. It doesn't need to. It's all implied what led to the bombings. It really does heavily focus more on the Japanese citizens having to deal with this after already dealing with a bomb. They show no characters that were basically proud of the war, that wished it had gone a different way. They wish it had never happened, basically. Godzilla just makes that hit home even harder for some of these characters, obviously. So I really like that element of the film. I really like that the characters' perspective on the war was that it was not a good thing to start. It was not a good idea. But again, they don't get into the nitty gritty. There's no anti-American really thing pushed in it. There's no really pro-war thing pushed in it. It really just focuses on the characters' own disparity and having to fight to stay alive. And I really like it. And the main character's growth and change and interaction with characters from the beginning of the film, and kind of mending broken relationships and friendships with people that hate him and forming new alliances was really done well in the film, and I really like it. Overall, the human side of this, the acting, the drama there, that is the best part of Godzilla -1. Now just the practical stuff. The cinematography, the special effects, the music. I liked everything pretty much. Nothing was bad, nothing was horrible. Everything was pretty good. I love the music. I love that they played Godzilla's classic scary music when he was walking through the city. It just reminded me of the old movies and the video games. I liked that a lot. That was really good. I love that they used that classic music. CGI, everything looked good. I would say Godzilla looked better when he was in the water, because it's just pure blue water and then just a blue sky in the background. You don't really have much to compare him to, so all of his details are the main focus, and you're not comparing him to very much. So when he was in the water, at least in the end of the movie, and when he was chasing the boat, he looked really good and really real. Like when his head was barely out of the water chasing the main character in the boat, which is something you've all probably seen in the trailer, he looked the most realistic there than anywhere else in the film. When he's in the city, it's a little splotchy. It looks a little fake. It's harder because I think because he's in a large city with a bunch of people running. 2014 Godzilla was what, 10 years ago now, almost 10 years ago, and that Godzilla looked a little better. CGI wise. I'm not sure if it's a budget thing. No, this was a smaller production, I do believe, than what Warner Brothers could give, you know, their Godzilla. But at the same time, yeah, it didn't look as good. It wasn't the best looking CGI Godzilla, but when he's in the water, he looked really, really good. Cinematography, apart from that, was really good. The shots of Godzilla they took, the shots you've seen from the trailer where after he uses his atomic breath and he just roars and lifts his head into the air, it's really cool. It's really cool. They're really cool shots. So we talked about the human side of things, plot-wise, the acting, the drama there. Now I want to talk about Godzilla plot-wise, and more of his design, and we already talked about everything in between. So I'll just say Godzilla was my least favorite part of this film. I am a huge Godzilla fan. There's no bias either for, oh, I like the American-made Godzilla better just because it's America or something like that. I used to watch the Japanese Godzilla movies growing up. I absolutely love those movies. Played the original video games, a lot of the old video games, and I've always been a Godzilla fan for years, ever since I was a little kid. I was very excited when 2014 Godzilla was coming out. When I saw that teaser from Warner Brothers, that made me so excited. I was very disappointed with Godzilla vs. Kong, and then Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I think came before that one. Those were really, really bad and kind of fell to the Marvel effect, what I call it in Hollywood, in terms of acting and storytelling. Godzilla Minus One, I was excited for this too. So I've never just been a fan of just the American side of Godzilla. It's failed at times, both have failed at times, both have succeeded at times, whether it be Japan or America, or whoever does a Godzilla movie. There's no bias here. The Godzilla here is my least favorite part because of how they handled him in the plot and some elements of his design and his animation. So there are 3 areas there about Godzilla where it just doesn't work for me, and I promise you there's no bias or anything. Legendary's Godzilla is my favorite, and I will be making comparisons as to why I think what they did with him plot-wise was better than Godzilla Minus One. First and foremost, let's just talk about story-wise. I know they wanted to go with the original story of Godzilla attacking Japan, just being the villain basically, and wanting to just wipe out Japan, tear apart buildings, stomp on people, and somehow see them as a threat. That's something that I never found realistic. I kind of always had a bit of a problem with that. In Godzilla movies and stories. I understand he's supposed to be an anti-nuclear message, so it would make sense from that perspective to have him attack Japanese people and to tear apart cities, but that never made a ton of sense to me. I never understood why something that large would look at a bunch of things on the ground that are basically ants to him and say, yeah, these are a threat to me. I should tear apart these buildings around me, which are clearly not animals or creatures trying to attack me. These are clearly structures. He's smart enough to know they're not animals, so he just likes to crush all these buildings because he feels it's some threat to his territory. And then he uses his atomic breath. Again, there's no creatures around, there's no animals around that are his size, anywhere near his size or threatening to him, just a bunch of little people who are ants to him. But he uses his atomic breath anyway and kind of clears the area. I just never found that realistic. I never found that to be, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense why Godzilla would do that. 2014 Godzilla, on the other hand, he wasn't a full-blown good guy like some people think he was. More of, I guess the term people use, anti-hero, because Godzilla didn't really care for people in that movie either. But he wasn't like this Godzilla, where he looked at them and saw them as a threat. But at the same time, he didn't care if they died. Godzilla, basically in that plot, the reason he would show up on land, the reason he would show up in cities was because there was another animal there, another creature that was a threat to him. And so he wanted to kill it, get it out of his territory. And so in the beginning of Godzilla 2014, I think it's the first time he shows up on land, he basically causes a mini tsunami, which kills a lot of people. And the movie shows that people die from Godzilla just walking out of the water. So the movie doesn't really establish Godzilla as this good guy who loves humans and cares about them. And no, he pretty much thinks they're insignificant. The only good guy element of Godzilla from 2014 plot wise was that he didn't actively go out to say, I need to just exterminate them all. That was not his goal, and that made more sense for me. I liked the plot they did. I think it was a little more realistic for them to go with the direction of he has a better reason for coming on land, and the only reason buildings are getting destroyed is because he's having a fight, not because he sees those inanimate buildings as a threat. I know some people aren't gonna like this. This is not gonna be the popular opinion. I understand that. I don't judge things based on nostalgia. I don't judge things based on whether or not it follows an original recipe. If the original recipe didn't work that well and it didn't make much sense, that's when I like changes. And I feel like the changes they made in 2014 were good. There are times where he just looks like he's just mindless. He doesn't know what he's doing, and it's like he's just controlled by someone to go and attack the Japanese, because again, it doesn't make a lot of sense plot wise, and that kind of goes hand in hand with his design, which we're kind of making a little segue to right now. His design of always having the angry face, the eyebrows like that, they wanted to go with that look. I didn't like that either. I understand they wanted to make him look more menacing, but I wasn't a big fan of it. But at the same time, I was like, you know what? The angry face kind of goes in line with the plot of him just trying to wipe out a bunch of humans on the ground, just mindless, just doing this for whatever reason. So you know what? The stone cold angry face with little to no changes in expression kind of go along with the plot, whereas 2014 Godzilla actually had different facial expressions and could actually make angry faces and then go back to a curious face or a calm face, and I like that. But Godzilla only having one face the entire movie, having his mouth open as he walked and just his eyes practically open most of the time, just a blank angry stare, looking like a statue at times. Well, I guess it kind of went along with his mindless, confusing attacks on Japan. Overall design of the body, I didn't have a big problem with that. Just this shot right here is really cool, really good. I really like this, but again, I like the body aspect of it more than the face. Once I get up to the head here, what you're looking at, I don't really like it too much. Again, they went with that angry look and the ridges on his head. I didn't really like that. But I do like the spikes. I did like the tail. It's classic Godzilla, at least classic more from like the video games I played in early 2000s. It looks more like that. I like that a lot. But it's ironic, the image that you're seeing right here, you know, shows him being a little more fluid in his movements and everything. This is another part of the movie where they couldn't decide, or they did decide for whatever reasons, to have him be part robot and part animal. His walk cycle was annoying. It was cringy. It was downright stupid. I was not a fan. There were so many moments in the film where whenever he walked, he had his arms out like this, just straight forward, like he was a robot. His arms were just out stiff, perfectly straight, not his entire arm, but just side to side, up to the elbows, and then he would bend his arms out at like a perfect 90-degree angle and just walk around like that. And I was like, are they trying to make him look like he's in a costume? Which someone told me they think they did that to pay homage or just out of respect to the original Godzilla, which was a guy in a costume. So that's why they had him do that. It's fine if you want to do that for one scene as like an Easter egg or something, and people can go, oh hey, he walked weird for like 5 seconds. Why did he do that in one shot? Oh, that's because he looks like a guy in a costume. That's very cool. I like that they did that. And then the rest of the film, he's more fluid with his arms, and he's more fluid and animal-like in the way he walks. But they didn't do that. Instead, they said, no, we're gonna have him walk like this for the entire movie unless he directly interacts with something like the main character flying around him in a jet and he wants to swat at it, or a building is in front of him and we need him to attack it, or there's a train in front of him and we need him to basically, well, actually no, he actually did turn into a robot again for that scene. He kind of attacked the train like one of those toy birds that you have on your desk that dips its head into the water. It was a little off-putting the way he bit the train as well. But all the other moments, they had him walking around like that. When Godzilla was walking onto the land at the end of the movie, he was walking like that. The main character flies around him in his plane, and Godzilla tries to swat at him, and then he's more fluid. His arms are in different places. They're not just straightforward anymore. But then once the main character flies away from Godzilla and starts to lead him back to the ocean, then Godzilla goes back to that stupid walk cycle where his arms are out like this. I didn't like it. I understand, again, people are only gonna like this out of nostalgia. I understand it's an original thing. I don't care. That would be like somebody making a modern day Batman movie, like say Robert Pattinson's, and every time Batman turned his head, he turned his entire body like this, and the mask was basically attached to the cape and the suit, so much so that it was so stiff he couldn't turn his head. And the excuse from a director would be, oh, well, I'm just trying to pay respects to Michael Keaton's Batman. That's why I have his mask basically sewed onto his suit so he can't turn his head. So every time he wants to look in a different direction, he has to do this. He has to do this the whole time through the entire movie. Imagine a modern day Batman, 2.5 hours long, and we have to watch Batman move around like that. You wouldn't like that, even if it was paying respects to an old classic thing, which is what this movie was doing. I don't like his animation. I don't like his walk cycle. I don't like that they did that. It was pretty silly. It kind of took me out of the moment. Like, trying to feel dramatic in that moment, trying to feel like, oh my gosh, is the main character gonna die? Is this girl gonna die? What's he gonna do? You don't feel that way when you see him walking in like this. When you see Godzilla walking in like that, it kind of kills the moment, and you kind of don't really feel intimidated anymore. You would in that moment, but watching the movie as a viewer, you're not gonna, it kind of takes you out of the moment. Godzilla was my least favorite part. His atomic breath was cool. I liked that the spikes popped out of him one by one as he was launching it. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky at this point. I don't like how quickly his head snapped forward whenever he used his atomic breath. It was kind of off-putting. You basically saw it in the teaser trailer when, you know, his tail is lighting up all the way up to his head, his spikes, and they're growing basically or popping out of him. And then he coils back his head, and when he launches his head forward to release the atomic breath, his head snaps forward so quickly. It's kind of off-putting. It made it look really fake, and it made him look kind of bad. I really wish they had slowed that down just a little bit. I don't like how fast his head jerks forward when he does that. That's the last thing. I had a problem with animation-wise. The human element of this film is the best. Those are my favorite parts of the movie. I wanted to see more of the main character. I wanted to see more of his story. I could have watched an entire movie just seeing him live his life with this girl and try to get through his nightmares and have his friends help him, and I would have been happy. So I know this isn't gonna resonate with most Godzilla fans and other reviews you've probably seen. I understand there's a lot of nostalgia here. I understand there's a lot of original things going on here, but that doesn't mean they work. That doesn't mean they should be constant core elements of the film, apart from Easter eggs. But again, it was cool to see him in action. It was exciting to see him show up from time to time. It was fun seeing their attempts to destroy him and deal with him. Those parts were fun. Those parts were exciting at times. I did enjoy them very much so. Godzilla, again, still, I love the overall design of the body. I think it's classic Godzilla from the video games, early video game days, the fighting games, and I like that a lot. It is really cool. Maybe a little too generous, but overall, I would say 7 out of 10. The Godzilla parts just kind of keep it from being a 10 out of 10. The human side of things are just amazing, but it's a Godzilla movie, and Godzilla in 3 different areas, animation, plot, some design elements, didn't really work out too well in my opinion, but overall, a good Godzilla movie. Definitely better than Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla King of the Monsters. It did better than those legendary Godzilla movies, for sure. It was much better than those. But 2014 Godzilla is still my favorite, and still to this day, I believe the best live-action Godzilla movie we've ever received. I am excited to see the follow-up to this film. There was something at the end of the movie that indicates there will be a sequel, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Let me know what you thought about the decision-making with Godzilla and all the classic things they did with him and some of the throwbacks to the original Godzilla. And go check it out for yourself if you haven't seen it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.